Absolutely. Thank you very, very much. So I'm now going to turn to Tejas and Nina, who are stepping in kindly to speak to our discussion about fungi and other things in the biodiversity group.
Sure, I'll go first, and then Tejas can fill in all of the things that I've forgotten to mention, because it's a very rich discussion, as several participants noted. So I'm going to start with OECM, so other existing, and there's another word I'm forgetting, conservation measures. And we heard from Harry Jonas from WWF on how they're a really useful way to integrate consideration of Indigenous land rights and to take account of a wider range of ways to conserve biodiversity outside of strictly protected formal areas, which just are simply not feasible to replicate everywhere. So it's a useful model to leverage conservation in areas where it's just not practical. We spoke about the advisory opinions, the 3 that came out last year, as well as the one shortly to come, I understand, from the African Court of People and Human Rights, and their role in stabilizing the facts for the legal debate, which is generally the IPCC reports, but also the implications of the science set out in the IPCC reports for interference with human rights, and also stabilizing the legal culture, the baseline from which now we understand where obligations arise and what those mean for states. With that baseline now stabilized by the ICJ, we heard from our future host in Yerevan. Tejas, you can help me with the name. Thank you when we get to it. We heard from him on what's to come from this newly stabilized legal baseline at COP17, and that led into a really interesting discussion from him on the effect the spotlight of hosting a COP has on institutions in that host country, and what Armenia was doing with that spotlight, which was really encouraging. And then that led to a wider discussion on the role of institutions generally in civil society in contributing to a balanced and informed debate and generating debates, particularly the role of civil society through forced transparency, and the need to develop adequate legal and policy frameworks for the enforcement of those existing laws was spoken of, as well as the need to develop new laws such as ecocide. We heard a wonderful and encouraging contribution on the rapid uptake, the really wonderfully positive uptake of ecocide as a notion around the world in the last 5 to 6 years, which, considering the level at which it's featuring in the debate globally, is remarkable what you've accomplished in that short amount of time. On the other side of the coin, so that was probably the highlight, the rapid disintegration of global networks of financial institutions and financial bodies when actually being held to account for their biodiversity and climate commitments spoken of, and kind of tie this all together. We heard of soil as the integrating network of fungi. So there are some networks that we're still focused on preserving alongside flora and fauna. So funga, flora, fauna is going to be the tagline for COP17, and also highlighting the fact that soil is the integrating factor amongst all 3 Rio conventions. And I just want to point out on the value of networks generally. Thank you to Marie-Claire, who forms, I guess, our soil in bringing us all here together to have this valued discussion and integrate our networks more. Thank you. Tejas, what did I miss?
No, thanks very much, Nina. I think you captured basically all of it. Our Yerevan host, Professor Karkosh, was kind enough to speak about the developments in Armenia and the build-up to the COP and how they're reevaluating, how being the host country of the COP also encourages them to reevaluate their environmental frameworks in order to encourage the world and encourage the region. There was also a discussion about how it could become another board and another forum to discuss peace in the region more broadly, which also fed in well with our discussion more generally about ecocide, which we did speak a bit about in the roundtable discussion, especially looking at the ways in which, or the status of where ecocide is across different jurisdictions, and understanding a bit more about about that. Additionally, on synergies, I think something that came up was how we could do with more transparency with discussions more generally, to allow for more actors to have access to the spaces in which decisions are made, to also give them the opportunity to be heard, and to also move this agenda forward because of bad faith actors acting within the system, behind silos or behind closed doors. That would especially be important for the biodiversity climate nexus to move forward, and also for things to be more integrated moving ahead. I think that between us, that captures effectively the entire discussion. And I think we're happy to pass the floor back to Tejas.
Okay, excellent. We're just making sure that Mike, who is on his way from the train, having been delayed, can still reach us. And Alessandra is going to make sure that Marcus doesn't think that he has to be the one to pick Mike up, because Mike's managed to get an Uber. The train station is on the other side of Cambridge, and that would be a bit of a walk. He'd be here at 6. We wouldn't. But I'd like to give a chance, because this is meant to be the part where we talk about biodiversity and climate. And I'd like to give a chance, especially for people who were in the climate workshop, to ask Nina and Tejas and anyone else who was in the biodiversity breakout group a few questions or make comments. And then we're going to do the same thing when Marcus comes back in, to Antoinette and Marcus. They're on the hot seat, and the biodiversity folk can ask them questions about whether or not they really have thought about fungi and other things that might come up, if that's all right. So who would be kind enough to start first? I'm going to come to people online as well. So please do not feel that because you are online, we don't see you. We actually do. And if you can turn on your cameras, we would see even more of you. My usual anti-lurking campaign. So we will be turning to you as soon as we've taken a couple of questions in the room. That's all right. Yes, please go ahead. And because the people from biodiversity won't know you, introduce yourself if that's all right.
I'm Edward Darling. I'm involved with the Life Map Foundation. We're one of the global stakeholders in the UN Action Plan for a Sustainable Planet. I was questioned that came up from this comment about transparency and the issues that both groups have had with silos, and well, the world has with silos, is that there's a great word, translucency. We don't need transparent information, but if we could have a method of being able to connect translucent information, that would be a huge step forward as we develop trust that some of the transparent information may then become available, which is open data, and if it's behind a paywall, then at least we know where it is and it can be sourced. And I would like to suggest that thought to you all.
And Tejas, Nina, what would you respond?
I agree, because, if I understand the point being made, because there's a risk of transparency leading to data overwhelm and losing the wood for the trees. So context, as always, is absolutely critical.
There's also issues of privacy and value that need to be protected, that the translucent information facilitates.
And it's really tricky because a lot of environmental information is gathered by private entities, and they have commercial interest in keeping it.
So translucent information around digital communities overcomes that issue.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think my only response is that, again, I think I mentioned this in the biodiversity roundtable as well, but one of the things that we don't frequently think about when we think about making things more transparent is that people can use their transparent things in bad faith. And the ability, I think the belief in the good of humans, and that if things are more transparent, human beings as a society will naturally act in using that data or that set in a positive way, is not necessarily one that we've seen to have worked over the course of history. And there's not necessarily all of the data available to us all of the time that supports some of our argumentation, which rests on more moral or philosophical differences or bases of how we view the world. And that's maybe my only pushback against that, is that if we do give people data, we also need to maybe supplement it with the context that maybe gives them the argument that we hope they will see without allowing them to see any other arguments. But yeah.
Can I just respond to that? Because the opportunity that when we met Marie Claire on the first occasion was with the book being launched by James Backhouse, which was about democracy and a sustainable world. And this whole question about the delegated responsibility at a local level is great, but you have to prepare people for that responsibility, which comes with the democratization of data to understand the issues of responsibility and prepare them for it, whether that's in Indigenous people or whether it's people completely divorced from all these issues that think that life's perfect or whatever end of the extreme. But there's a method of being able to use these digital boxes to be able to overcome these issues of silos and to build trust so that you don't give away transparent information and find it's used for all the wrong reasons, is that you're able to build that relationship and build that delivery system that everybody's been asking for, is how you can actually start to show delivery that can be aggregated as well as democratized.
Absolutely. We've got work that's being done in an International Law Association Experts Commission on the Sustainable Development Goals, specifically to look at how do you show legal effectiveness. Because obviously, you know, it's one thing to say we put a law in place and suddenly all the forest was protected. It's another thing to say we put a law in place and suddenly, oops, actually all the forest had already just burned down. That's not the law. That's the burning down of the forest that happened there. The law might have been great. There's just a couple of other small issues. And so looking at legal effectiveness, looking at what you can and can't trace and how, and looking at who you involve to say whether a law is working and how you actually can monitor whether the law is working, it's a lot more complex than people realize. And I luckily can trust the experts group. He made it, rather than anyone else to start looking at this carefully enough to answer those questions. But it's requiring real thought. No, Mike, you got to be in the round table. Good try for sneaking in. You wish. So we're going just into a little bit more detail with participants on the screen. I noticed quite a few people, including Joao from Belém and others, who are from the climate change group and should have a chance to ask questions of the facilitators and participants of the biodiversity roundtable. Would any of you like to ask questions or make comments from the biodiversity roundtable? I notice also that Natalia Lopez, we can now see you, which we couldn't while we were in the biodiversity roundtable. And if you would like to say anything or raise an additional point, you would of course be very, very welcome. Who would like to go first from our wonderful online group? She said, putting her glasses on so she could see. Sure. Natalia, would you like to make a brief intervention, given that you were in Cali as a representative? She's thinking about it. Okay, I can see. There we are. All right. So, Shahid Mahin Khan, would you like to unmute? You're very welcome.
All right. Good evening. This is Shahid Mahin Khan. Can you hear me?
We can.
All right. I'm from Pakistan and I represent women as a founder president for Women Chamber of Commerce and Industry in Karachi, and I'm an entrepreneur. So I do not represent any academia or from the legal department. It's a private sector. And I have a question, but I don't know how to link it to exactly what you're looking forward, but something, as you know, we're a developing country, Pakistan. So I would like to put a question. In our developing economies, women-led SMEs are deeply connected to agriculture, textile, food systems, and local supply chains. So how can international climate governance frameworks ensure that women entrepreneurs are not only beneficiaries, but active implementers of climate adaptation and green transition strategies? I would like to know from the respected members or any of the people from the academia or the law policymakers.
Excellent question. Thank you. I'm going to collect two more online as well, because you broke the ice most brilliantly. And we're extremely grateful for that. And also, it was an issue that didn't get enough treatment in our roundtable. I think Dina would agree. And would it be actually very, very good to hear people's answers. So I'm going to turn to
Because every time I heard the keywords like women empowerment and the policy, so I really wanted to put this question. Thank you.
Oh, absolutely. No, absolutely. Over to Abdul as well. We can see you. You're a big we can see you in the sky here in front of us.
All right.
Hi, good evening, Professor, my colleagues, and the lawmakers. I would like to add on to Saibzade Mahin Khan with a question that we have been working together in Karachi. I'm from Pakistan, and we have been working together on how to bring women entrepreneurs into the construction sector, because I represent the construction sector and I have been the former vice chairman at the Association of Builders and Developers, and I have been working on the policy making with the federal government as well for a very long time. But now we are unable to clarify. If you could guide us, how would we bring women into our sector, especially the construction sector? Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, excellent. Clearly, Pakistan is coming through very strong on SDG 5, and we welcome it. I'm going to also turn to Professor Dr. Nabil Madani and then Vito, and we'll take your two questions or comments, and then we're going to turn back to, in the room, the two sort of rapporteurs from the Roundtable on Biodiversity, and then our two rapporteurs from Climate before we move into our keynote. So please go ahead. You're now the big voice on the screen that we can see with your beautiful artwork in the background.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Professor Nabil Madani, I'm professor of environmental law at the University Hassan II Casablanca in Morocco, and the CEO founder of Madani Nexus Advisory. You are right, the key change now appears to be implementation. I would just like to share a brief observation from the perspective of environmental legal systems. In what the conference lightly describes as turbulent times, many countries have adopted increasingly sophisticated environmental legislation aligned with the international commitments, particularly following developments under the Paris Agreement and global biodiversity frameworks. However, the main challenge today often lies not in the adoption of legal frameworks, but in their implementation and the regulatory coherence. Sectorial silos, such as climate, water, biodiversity, energy, and circular economy, frequently foster the development of environmental governance despite the deep interconnectedness of ecological systems. In this context, the translating the outcomes of COP16 and global biodiversity processes into coherent national legal systems becomes a key governance challenge. In your view, this is my question to the roundtable. In your view, what role can legal systems and courts play in accelerating the transition from commitments to real world action? Thank you so much.
Excellent. That is a really, really good question. And it is one that was being discussed in the roundtable. So I think we're going to get some good answers from that. I can see also there's somebody else who's online with their hand up, but I can't see that they've been able to put their camera on, which is important. Ah, there you are. Yes. Vito, would you like to ask a question of the Biodiversity Roundtable? Because they're the ones who are reporting right now. Did you have something you wanted to hear from them about whether they discussed it, and if not, whether they could? If so, please do ask now.
Good evening, good morning. I am from India.
Yes, and introduce
and
yourself.
I represent All India Sector Development Council. I represent as a chairman of the committee. And we are recognized with almost 40 plus agencies and the UN European Commission under PIC. So I have been watching for the event for a couple of minutes, and I was in between some meetings. But we are interested into the diversity, biodiversity, biofuel, and climate change action projects, and would like to work together with your organization. So it's just an introduction, sorry. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much. I can see that this has started a real link. I'm going to turn back to the rapporteurs, but I'll just give one more second for Natalia Lopez to be able to raise a point, given she was one of our delegates in Cali at the CBD. Natalia, do you want to unmute?
Yeah, thank you very much, Marie-Claire, for giving me the floor. I am very happy to share this moment with all of you, this world community. I am from Colombia. I live in Bogota, and I had the great opportunity to be with the team of the BLGI at Cali 1.5 years ago. And yeah, I would just like to add 2 things. I unfortunately didn't have the chance to be present during all the session, but I would like to raise that one of the challenges that remain into these world discussions is to get all grassroots in organizations involved, and from one side, due to the language barrier, because not all people that is protecting biodiversity in the territories speaks the main language, which is English. So that from one side, and from the other side, I am very excited about how we are going to leverage the advisory opinions recently issued by the international courts and the International Court of Justice and the Inter-American Court of Human Rights into the discussions within the COPs, because there are definitely, for example, in the case of biodiversity protection, there are contributions that we can draw from the advisory opinions for the protection of biodiversity and linked to the protection of human rights. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to turn back to Nina and Tejas, who I'm sure broke down every single question and are ready to do a round robin of answers. And if not, they can also put others from that roundtable on the spot. And then I'm going to go over, because a few of the questions actually did relate more to what the climate change roundtable was discussing. I'm going to go back to Marcus and to Professor Marcus and Dr. Antoinette to give their views, starting with, of course, participation of women. Barrister.
You're looking at me. Okay, I'll structure this as best I can. I can't possibly address all of those excellent questions in the time that this room will have patience for. So I'm going to deal with the AOs, women, and synergies, and then pass to Tejas because he's got fab things to say on synergies. The advisory opinions, it cannot be overstated. Natalia, I'm so glad you brought them up, how important and game-changing those all are. We have seen their implementation in domestic jurisdictions affect those cases and the way litigation is conducted in a way nobody would have predicted. So to give a really exciting example, in Canada, there's a case progressing right now where, amongst other grounds that were permitted to be included in the ongoing claim as a result of the ICJ-AO, which is the International Court of Justice's advisory opinion. An Indigenous tribe is claiming that it's a breach of customary international law to permit any new fossil fuel development in Canada. And in the course of granting permission to add that amongst other grounds to the claim, the judge interpreted domestic Canadian law in line with the ICJ-AO. That has not happened before. So it's utterly setting a new world for us. It's very exciting. So that's AO is really, really thrilling. Women, I'm going to step outside of biodiversity for a second. I could go on days on this. I'm a member of a profession where the pay gap, gender pay gap has widened significantly in the past 6 years. It's getting worse, not better, at the bar. And it is not women's fault, trust me. Women have been graduating from law school at around about 60% to men's 40% for decades now. So it's not a pipeline problem. It's not women's problem. It's leadership and structural issues that is stopping that progression. So look at structures and get the leads of your agencies and bodies and commercial entities to talk about it. And then synergies. We did hear from our UNDP Tim Scott representative, who is fabulous. I'm not sure if he's still on the call, about how they're actually funding work to create those synergies between biodiversity, climate, and also pollution / desertification. So all of that work is being ongoing. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, because I think the next question is, where do I get that money? It was under BioFin, funded by the GEF, if that's right. Is that right, Tejas? Okay, I'm going to pass to you on synergies then.
Thanks so much, Nina. I think the one thing, just on all of those 3 points and on all of the questions that are raised, is that we frequently forget that a lot of what happens at these multilateral negotiations builds on obligations that already treaties. And then all of those obligations end up getting, as the advisory opinion says, that some COP decisions could be subsequent agreement, right? Doesn't tell us how or what or which, doesn't give us any guidance on these things, but it says it could. So if you play off of that, what we need to remember is that the language of these decisions should mean something. And so it's very important that as we follow these negotiations, we pay attention to the kind of language that gets adopted, because it's ultimately, and this came up in the conversation about technology earlier, what actually happens at these negotiations is a bunch of people sitting around a screen that has track changes on it, and then figuring out which ones to accept and reject together, collectively, right? Collectively doing this Word document editing. Why I say all of that as context is because the phrase that gets used before a particular clause or before a particular paragraph matters. It matters for the kind of money that gets put into women empowerment and participation within spaces for conservation, for nature positive solutions, for nature-based solutions, for the climate crisis, for all of that. It matters for the ways in which countries view the advisory opinion, which is part of what the work on the General Assembly resolution that accepts or welcomes the advisory opinion has been about, and then will translate into the paragraphs that get written about the advisory opinions across all of the COPs. And we're hoping to see it across every COP. If you look at the people who've been drafting the language for those particular paragraphs, so drafting the highest possible ambition language that they want to see, it goes beyond just welcoming. It goes into actually asking countries to do much more. And that's what we need to start paying more attention to, I think, as civil societies, to progressively keep pushing for this language to become much stronger, because the stronger the language is, the more likely it is that countries will start actually implementing those kind of things that they would lead to. The other side of it, of course, is what that language actually means, which goes to the question that Natalia asks. Natalia asks a question about how, especially speaking to how participation is often constrained by the fact that most of these negotiations take place in English principally, irrespective of where this takes place, which is a hindrance, of course, not just to those who come from underrepresented communities who may not be as comfortable expressing themselves within this language that is taken center stage, but it's also significant for the limitations of what the language itself means. There are things we can express in other languages that we cannot express in English. If you think back to the kind that you might be thinking about in your own head, and put quite simply, that's often the space in which literature about the advisory opinion, or literature about women's participation, or literature about indigenous communities has often moved much further ahead. And the thinking on these ideas is much further ahead than it is in English. So I think what it requires from all of us around the table speaking in English and doing this roundtable in English is a bit of reflexivity to think through and actually engage with them. And I don't mean to use them in an otherizing way. I mean to use it in terms of what is out there, and to actually take that step or take that ownership on ourselves to say we are going to search for that literature and welcome them into this community. Because that's what we do every time we go to a new host country. In Colombia, we had sessions taking place in Spanish. In Egypt, we had a session taking place in Arabic, and so on, to allow for these voices to be heard in the way they should be heard, rather than trying to translate them effectively. Those are a few non-coherent thoughts not emerging from the roundtable, but they are thoughts nonetheless that I hope we can all reflect on and share. I'll pass back to the chair.
I'm going to turn to Marcus and to Antoinette to give us their thoughts on questions that really were quite appropriate for both roundtables. And then I'm going to be very, very pleased to introduce our keynote speaker, who has made it on time, despite 500 other things that he was supposed to be doing this afternoon, including something he's supposed to be chairing right now. Luckily, when it's your management committee, you can cut it short if you need to. So I'll turn first to Marcus. I imagine you have.
Yeah, I think
including the questions from.
Yeah, I think what was quite interesting was that in both roundtables, we discuss the influence or lack thereof of the advisory opinions. As lawyers, we're of course glued to what a court has to say. But what many of our participants noted was that in the final outcome, despite it being raised in negotiations and from different countries shied away from even acknowledging that actually the goalposts for some of these negotiations have shifted significantly, right? So that's more an underlying current, maybe. But of course, and maybe that's an aspect we need to watch out for more, any international court of justice opinion then also has an impact on how the domestic legal orders develop, right? And that is starting to happen. Litigants are referencing the ICJ advisory opinion in particular. We already have the first a couple of judgments coming out at the domestic level, and that becomes a very significant development that will also shape domestic climate law going forward. I think the ecocide, I'm looking to Leah, who's the resident expert here in the Lauterpacht Center on the topic. The ecocide discussions used to be very esoteric and very sort of abstract and very theoretical, and they are becoming more concrete. And the fact that we're no longer discussing the concept as something that is purely aspirational, but rather is taking concrete legal shape, and even to the point where it's mentioned in EU legislation, it's implemented as a crime in some selected domestic legal orders. That should give us all pause for thought. And of course, I think the geopolitical climate and the ramifications of some of the actions of foreign heads of states, maybe not in Europe, but in North America, should us all give pause for thought, because in a way, an international legal order that has no order is very problematic indeed.
All right then. With that grim yet quite possibly accurate note, Antoinette, did you want to add anything? Ideally hopeful from the local level.
Yes, I will add something a bit more cheerful. So yeah, in relation to sort of like and what the question I saw that they're all were coming together is basically, how do you get there? You have everything sort of like all those different elements. And just to celebrate women as well, sort of, it was International Women's Day a few days ago, so that was something that is always worth celebrating. And yeah, I think sort of coming from like sort of women in power, or kind of like the green transition and how it would be implemented, and then also the policy implementation element. I think that what else is there to support? You also need childcare, for example. You need health, you need education, you need access to all those different elements that without them, you're not going to reach any of the sustainable development goals, or you're not going to reach any of the implementation of the different sort of advisory opinions, because you don't have that platform to even start. So the question is how you get there. And I feel that that's where local representation, where democracy and the delegated powers, as Marie-Claire mentioned before, is where at the local level we can make a difference. And then when you add the SDGs to it, I think becomes something much more powerful. And at the same time, when you start looking into all that, then you develop the economy, then you add sort of all the things that are needed, such as I said, education, and you create placemaking. And that's when you go back to the start to say, yes, we're doing something and we're all here together. So hopefully that was a positive note.
I think that was, and I can see Natalia smiling online from Colombia, because she's very deeply dedicated as well to the local level. And I think these are important insights that we'll also be carrying forward for Yerevan and for Francalia. It's the sort of, need to, as Professor Chris and Professor Alexandra said as we opened, sort of tie these agendas together in a coherent way and ensure that the successes and the areas where more work is needed. There's a little more of number two, maybe, really inform what we do in the next 4 years for the 2030 deadline and beyond, especially as some of these processes recalibrate. All right. So with that, it's been a very intense day. We've had some incredibly brilliant interventions. We've also had some a bit heart-stopping moments. It sounds like in both of the roundtables with interveners online who brought in, how do we rebuild in my country, which has just been bombed? What does it do with air quality and biodiversity when the green buildings that you built are now in rubble on the biodiversity side, and then of course on the climate side, as we heard. You also had some very heartfelt interventions from our colleagues online. I'm